Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 75. You're watching two guys sitting down on a nice, it's the longest day of the year, go figure, June day, talking about all things Anglican. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And this week's episode is brought to you by Forward in Faith. And today is June 22nd, 2013.
Okay, George, it's been a week or two since we've taped our episode, and yes, I look relaxed. The countenance is good. I just got back from Wisconsin, my home state. I had brats with Mom and Dad, and I got to go to Nashotah House. It's a seminary in the Episcopal Church and Anglican Church, and at Nashotah House was the Provincial Council of the Anglican Church in North America. We got lots of news about what's happened over the last year. The biggest news is the Archbishop of Canterbury sat down for 4 hours with Archbishop Robert Duncan and discussed the future of ACNA. What do we know, George?
Well, we know from Archbishop Duncan's presidential address that there was a 5-hour meeting, 4 or 5-hour meeting at Lambeth Palace with Justin Welby. And the meeting was very positive, very affirming, and Archbishop Duncan mentioned that in the next 2 years we should resolve the question of the orders of the ACNA. And when I read that, my eyebrows shot up. I know you can't see it, but I have eyebrows. They shot up because I thought the question was whether the ACNA is going to be a province, not whether the orders of its clergy are deemed to be valid. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's a major step backwards or a major step forwards. But we checked with the ACN office, did Archbishop Duncan mean to say orders or did he mean to say province? And they responded, he meant orders.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because we learned from Rowan Williams that relationships come from diocese to diocese or diocese to province. So if the Anglican Church in North America wants to be recognized as a province, they do that by being recognized by other dioceses like in the Church of England and stuff like that. It's not Canterbury does not make a province, according to Rowan Williams. According to Justin Welby, there may be a return to that power structure where the Archbishop of Canterbury makes you the province or makes you a diocese. I'm not sure the long-running stand with that. However, from my sources who know more about what happened in the meeting, Archbishop Duncan was very pleased with the meeting with Archbishop of Canterbury, and he has a new respect for the Archbishop that wasn't there before. So we'll have to see what happens in the long term. It's folly to think that there's going to be
Kevin,
a quick response.
Kevin, I'm glad Bob Duncan has a respect for Justin Welby because I seem to have less and less of it as time goes by. We have all these grand pronouncements, and Archbishop Welby just really is on the ball about payday lending and banking issues. And that may go down well with the Church of England, but you know, there's a wider problem within the Anglican Communion, and we are now almost a year on since his announcement, good 3 months since his enthronement, and 6 months since they hired somebody to do reconciliation. And what's happened? Nothing.
Well, nothing. I think one of the biggest issues that Archbishop Welby has is he kept the same staff. He hired on a couple of token people, one from America and one from England. But other than that, if you're going to keep the staff, you're going to have status quo and modus operandi, and England is going to keep itself out of the Anglican picture. Fine. If that's how you want to be in the Church of England, you don't want to be part of the international politics, so be it. The rest of the Anglican Communion can't wait to get started. Back to Archbishop Duncan's speech, there's kind of good news, bad news. The good news is the church is growing. We're still planting about a church a week. The bad news, and this exists in the whole Anglican Communion, churches aren't filing their parochial reports. Obviously, George, you're an on-time filer, aren't you?
Oh,
no.
I never, Kevin, would be late. I'm always late.
You're always late.
I'm always late with the parochial report because, frankly, I got better things to do. I didn't say that, of course. I'm sorry, Ken and Bennett. I didn't say that.
But no, that's an honest thing. It's happened since day one. You know, 001 AD, People were having trouble getting the parochial reports on time. And so when Archbishop Duncan, who's trying to grow 1,000 church plants in his 5-year tenure in office, says, you know, we got the stats and all the bishops tell me they have these many churches, but the churches aren't recording their performances, their baptisms, their marriages. Well, that's the same old problem we've been having for years and years and years, and even the greatest technology on the internet and all the abilities to clip a hyperlink to fill in your parochial report isn't doing a thing. Some of the bad news is, surprise, surprise, affinity dioceses aren't going to work in the long run. We're starting to butt up in some bishop tensions, and we can't have every geographical diocese butted up with 3 or 4 affinity dioceses on top of it. And I think people are looking around the room and said, how did we get this far along without dealing with the problem? Affinity dioceses cause tension, and they're great for making up in the quick run a province like America. However, in the long run, is if they're trying to solve solutions that should be solved differently. What do you think is going on here, George?
Well, I agree with you, Kevin. At the foundation of the Anglican Church of North America, it made sense to have affinity groupings.
Sure.
An Anglo-Catholic congregation that was in the Episcopal Church that was cut off from fellowship, cut off by I mean, they were just out there by themselves. It made perfect sense for them to be linked with other Anglo-Catholic congregations. Now we're a few years on to that point, and we're into the phase of church planning. There's not going to be another wave of Episcopal Church defections that I see coming in the short term. And the ACNA is growing through new congregations and new church plans. And these are both geographically oriented dioceses and affinity diocese church plans. And the problem is that you're basically perpetuating some of the doctrinal divisions that are always kept in tension within Anglicanism, and also you're robbing. Example, Southern California is rich prime territory for church growth, and Bill Thompson is the bishop of the Western Anglicans. Bill Thompson is on the Anglo-Catholic side of the equation. It's a very traditional diocese. And then they have these new Anglican affinity groups that are working to plant congregations virtually next door in Orange County to the churches that they're planting. In essence, you've got 2 visions of what it means to be an Anglican advertised on the same street. It can work in some places. In New England, Bill Murdoch is doing a great job in working with Tad Barnum to try to overcome these difficulties. But when that's the exception, when Bill Murdoch and Tad Barnum are the exception, the rule is that you're going to have tensions and difficulties, and the church is going to be hampered in its growth by these unresolved problems.
Well, it's interesting because the model always has been geographic diocese, okay? And they wanted to do something brand new called affinity. It's in the Constitution of ACNA, but they were doing affinity for the wrong reasons. If affinity is to avoid doctrinal issues, you're just going to cause tension. And there's an existing tension. I've not talked to one bishop who would say publicly that they don't like affinity, but in private they don't like affinity. They'll discuss it all day long. They're, okay, the Peri USA and the Cana bishops, they like affinity, but the reality is it's not going to work long term. Now, George and I are going on the edge here because we're going to get lots of emails and phone calls this week from bishops who, oh, but we love affinity. Well, you're creating self-attention. We've talked before. The elephant in the room 3 years ago was EMEA. The elephant in the Provincial Council last year was women's ordination. The elephant in the room this year is affinity. The Archbishop of the province, Robert Duncan, knows that. And he doesn't want to leave this affinity legacy with the next Archbishop.
But let me interject, Kevin, and say from my own experience, there can be good tension, there can be creative tension. And I'll just use my anecdotal information from my Episcopal Diocese of Central Florida, which is a good, healthy diocese. There are lots of different types of Episcopalians, but there's a very strong evangelical component, including me, and there's a very strong Anglo-Catholic wing. And the clergy are always discussing issues like the filioque clause, like transubstantiation, like how is one saved, is one justified, where do works come in all of this? Now, we all recognize each other as brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. They're all fellow Christians. But how we understand doctrine, how we understand things, and the traditions we come out of are placed in tension with each other. So that when I make the statement that dual progression of the Holy Spirit as stated in the Nicene Creed is a prerequisite of the faith, I need to defend that argument because my Anglo-Catholic or my Orthodox friendly people will say, well, why? Why is that so? Why do you say that? It causes me to strengthen myself and to question myself. So when you have fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who on the secondary issues differ, and you split them into different entities, you're creating the problem of potential ossification, where opinions get locked because they're never questioned. And I don't think that's healthy for any institution, especially a church.
And I don't think virtual dioceses can work in the 21st virtual century. There's just no way that your bishop can reside on the East Coast when you live on the West Coast. It's a built-in dynamic that isn't going to succeed unless you only want to see your bishop on a computer screen.
Well, Kevin, you know, for evangelical speaking, I believe bishops are a necessary evil, so I wouldn't mind if I only saw the bishop on the computer screen. I don't mean that, Bishop Brewer, I'm very sorry. No, but, you know, again, this is, you know, what is the role and importance of a bishop? Mm-hmm. Is he a king? Is he a prince? He's a prelate? Is he the chief pastor? Is he the chief liturgist? There is no definition of bishop in Anglicanism that is universally accepted. That's another one of our problems. It's not the ACNA's fault, but it's our.
Foreign faith is the vehicle and the organism for the continuation of the Oxford movement, which is, in fact, a continuation of the faith of the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
I'm on my good friend Alan Haley, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the legal issues going around the church. California, Virginia, and South Carolina are topics today. Let's talk about Virginia. That's kind of the biggest, most long-running case. Not good news.
No, the petition for rehearing, which the Falls Church had filed with the Supreme Court of Virginia, was denied without an order, a single one-page order, no opinion or anything like that. So that pretty much finishes them with the Virginia Supreme Court, and the only avenue they would have left would be a petition for certiorari filed with the U.S. Supreme Court, which they have 90 days, which they could do that.
But the U.S. Supreme Court really doesn't want to get involved in Virginia law.
No, and this decision mostly had to do with Virginia law. There's a possible angle they could make that the state court created a preference for a church like the Episcopal Church that isn't available to others, but that's a narrow read on which to try to get the Supreme Court interested, especially since it's turned down so many recent other cases from states involving church property disputes.
Well, it actually made new laws, kind of the interesting thing. This
Well,
brand new judge says, well, we're going to interpret things differently from now on.
yeah, all of a sudden the parish now is the trustee of the diocese. The diocese comes to the parish for guidance and advice. Is that news or not? But that's what happens when civil judges get hold of religious matters. They just don't have the background or understanding to figure out how it must work.
But for you and I, we have the wonderful state of South Carolina, where
Right.
things start to make sense. There's more. The atoms go around the nucleus. It's so weird that
I know.
it's like the perfect state for a lawyer and a judge to work together. Tell me what's going on the latest there.
Okay, well, what happened was that the federal court did the right thing and sent the case back to the state court in South Carolina, from which the Episcopal Church and its rump diocese had tried to remove it, claiming that this was purely a federal case, needed to be decided in federal court. And the federal court disagreed, said, no, this is a state trademark law case if I ever saw one. It was carefully pled that way. And we're going to send it back to state court because they're the ones who should deal with this in the first instance. And if you have your issues at the end of the day, if you go up to the South Carolina Supreme Court and you still think that the federal issues haven't been resolved properly, you can take an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the federal district court in Charleston does not need to deal with this. So he simply sent it back. And as I say, that was the right thing to do under the circumstances, given the facts. There's still a federal trademark case personally pending in the federal district court, filed by Bishop von Rosenberg personally against Bishop Lawrence. But I expect the court to enter an order any day now saying that that case is held in abeyance, pending the outcome of the litigation in state court.
Well, because of some of the strange victories the Episcopal Church has in legal settings, even you were a little wary that they might get away with this in federal court.
Yeah, they certainly brought in the firepower. They had 3 law firms working on the arguments and the briefs, and this was an attempt to impress the federal court with the importance and weightiness of the issues, but I don't think it worked.
All right, some 5 years ago, some court proceedings got started in California.
Correct.
And have you had your day in court yet?
Not yet. We're coming to it. Finally coming to it after it'll be 5.5 years, and 2 court appeals. What happened there was in the Fresno case against Bishop John David Schofield, who is of course no longer in that position, but anyway, the lawsuit continues against him. And that case is going to go to trial next January because the trial court in Fresno denied Eckes's motion for summary judgment, and the Rump Diocese, Bishop Talton, denied their motion, as I say, to have no trial, to get it all over with right now. They took up a writ appeal, what's called an emergency appeal, up to the 5th District Court of Appeals here in Fresno also. And that court denied the writ in just a single one-page order, again, like the Virginia court, just saying, nope, writ denied. So there won't be any special proceedings to interfere with this case now going to trial. And as I say, it's set for trial, a jury trial, on January 6th of next year.
A jury trial. Wow.
Yeah. Well, if to the extent the court will allow it, and the extent the issues are appropriate for a jury, it will remain to be seen exactly how many issues a jury will get.
Well, I mean, we all remember OJ, and we all remember what a California jury decides. I know. You've taken away any hope.
Yeah, you're really putting your hands in the civil, secular courts at that point, right? So there may be some rethinking of that as it goes along, because you don't have to decide on a jury until the last minute, practically, in California.
In fact,
you just have to put your notice out there saying you're going to do it, but you can always, if you refuse to pay the jury fees, then they don't call a jury. It's that simple.
Well, is your choice between 1 judge, 3 judge, and a jury, or what's your choices?
No, it's 1 judge or judge and jury.
Okay, wow. All right, so something for our viewers of Anglican Unscripted to pray about. It's sad to see what happened in Virginia, and it's glad to finally see your day in court in California.
And there's one other case we should mention, Quincy, which is now, there's going to be oral arguments after the trial in that case. We've submitted all the briefs, and the judge wants to ask questions and do oral arguments. That's going to be next Tuesday, June 25th, so that's another day to add to prayers. And then after that, he'll take it under advice and issue his decision in due course, probably within a month or so.
Now, you've read some of these briefs.
Yes.
Does the judge know how much the Episcopal Church is coming to the border of lying without really lying? Does he see through that, or is that just something he has to, it's tech again? Or how does that work?
I think he regards it as a matter of opinion and stretching things, not so much lying, because the whole case he mentioned toward the end of it was, this whole case has been nothing but opinions. There's not many facts. And so, tech does tend to exaggerate when it comes to its authority and the need to defer to it just as a matter of opinion. And so it's kind of, but I think the judge as well, he showed already that he can distinguish opinion from fact, and that he's only going to give opinion the weight that he thinks it's credible. So that will be an issue to bear on as he looks at it and as he makes his decision. He could decide this very, very simply if he wanted to, and we'll see what he does, because to me, the law has changed since the Episcopal Church was founded. and all through the 19th century when it tried to maintain this image as a hierarchical church. And Watson v. Jones, the 1872 decision that gave the Episcopal Church its day in court by saying it's a hierarchical church, etc. And it's feasted on that ever since. But the law has changed in the interim. First Amendment law now applies to the states. It didn't used to in the 19th century.
That's great.
Only beginning in the 1930s and 40s did the U.S. Supreme Court, in a series of decisions, begin to apply the First Amendment through the 14th to the separate states. And what that means is the First Amendment contains a very important right called freedom of association. You have a right to join an association and to unjoin, to disaffiliate from it. And that's protected absolutely by the First Amendment. It can't be infringed by any court. So if an Episcopal Church goes into a state court now and tries to get it to make the diocese stay against its will, it's asking that court to violate the First Amendment, and it's not going to do that. So as I say, this is the whole development.
I would say that Joseph McCarthy and the Episcopal Church disagree with you. I don't think there's
That's
freedom
true.
of association.
This theory has yet to be, but it's right square in front of the judge in the Quincy case.
That's good.
It has yet to be issued. That's addressed by a court in any decision so far involving a diocese, but it is squarely in front of the judge in Quincy, and so we'll see what he does with it.
Awesome. Thank you for your report this week. And, people don't know, but every Friday we check the Texas Supreme Court to see if there's a
Right.
decision. We're waiting for the U.S. Supreme Court on same-sex marriage. Alan and I are in a waiting game of what we get to talk about this week. And, pretty soon we'll be talking about old cases, back in the writer area. So.
But one of these weeks, Kevin, it's going to be Fort
Open.
Worth.
It's like lotto. Yay, we won. Thank you, Alan.
Okay.
On to story 2, and George and I are in the know, and we've heard rumors that the Archbishop of Canterbury flew to Rome, he didn't swim the Tiber, no, and met with the new Pope Francis. Now, let's just give a little bit about how the press treats each of these individuals who came to office within 3 days of each other. Pope Francis is very beloved, and he's looked on as kind of a liberal. Everybody instantly assumes he's middle of the road on homosexuality and marriage and living together because he's so happy, he loves people, he kisses the kids, blesses the infirmed, and dresses much different than popes before him. How is Archbishop Welby treated by the press, George?
Archbishop Welby had a very short honeymoon. Whenever he talks about things that are business related, the press pays attention to him. They lap up all the stuff he says about attacking payday lenders, the guys where you cash your paycheck and charge horrendous interest rates.
Sure.
When he attacks the London city banks for improper practices, the newspapers love him. When he talks about ethical and moral issues, they paint him as sort of a pencil-neck geek with teeth a little too big in his mouth and just make fun of him, sort of what they did with George Carey. So the press in Britain is a little schizophrenic right now. He doesn't have the adulation that Rowan Williams kept for years from the British press, but nor is he at the George Carey level of bitter hatred. But on issues, he bops around between the two.
It's interesting because the Pope gets better press in England than the Archbishop of Canterbury. And it's the way it's going to be. It's always going to be unfair to the head of the Church of England. Now, they went to meet, and obviously they're not going to get together and have great theological talks. This isn't the meeting of a symposium of the church or some conciliar reconciliation. This is two guys saying, hey, how was your first 3 weeks? Well, mine are pretty rough. How was your first 3 weeks? Well, I got to kiss babies. And so they talk about fun things of the church, and one of that is to strengthen the family. They talk about poverty, and they talk about things that aren't going to be remarkable to the press, and that's why it didn't make big press, George.
Well, the press that it did make, actually, some of it was quite bad. The Huffington Post reported that the Pope and Justin Welby sat down and they talked about their differences over homosexuality and women clergy.
Never happened.
Well, actually, in the press conference after their meeting, Archbishop Welby was accompanied by the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Westminster, Vincent Nichols.
Yep.
They shared what was discussed, and they discussed poverty, family issues, social issues, the things of a very pastoral nature. They did not talk about women clergy because, frankly, there was nothing to talk about. And when Justin Welby was asked about homosexuality, he said he and the Pope are one on this issue and being opposed to gay marriage and being opposed to the normalization of homosexuality in Western society. So they're not on opposite pages on the issues of homosexuality, but they are on women clergy, and they're not even going to bother talking about that because there's nothing to be said.
Yeah, and it's just not worth talking about, and let that go down the road. It's going to be unique to watch both of them hold office over the next dozen or so years, because this Pope is a different Pope than ones we've had before. He's not like Benedict. He's not like Jean Paul. He is much more a people's Pope. And
yes, he made lots of headlines because he would take the bus and the subway in Buenos Aires. He, as you pointed out, he doesn't wear the bright red shoes and do all the historical papal regalia. He is very simple, but that doesn't mean he's simple-minded or somehow that he's not quite the intellect that Pope Benedict was. Now, Pope Benedict was a German theologian. In fact, when he and Rowan Williams got together, they would speak in English and in German because both spoke both languages. When Justin Welby met with Pope Francis, they had a Spanish language interpreter because they don't speak the same languages. But Benedict and Francis are not opposites. They both, through their own particular skill sets, work towards the goal of converting the world to the faith in Jesus Christ through the institution of the Roman Catholic Church and in reforming the Vatican and the Curia to enable that to happen. Benedict did it in one fashion. In 2006, one of the first things Benedict did was to say no people with homosexual orientation may enter the ordination process. And one of the things that Francis talked about was we've got to clean up the gay lobby within the Vatican. Now, they're both following the same script. They just have different lines and different ways of acting on it.
Well, they do. And in the same way, Archbishop Welby is not like Archbishop Rowan Williams. Archbishop Welby is famous for saying, well, I'm just like Rowan Williams, except I have a razor. And, you know, that's not quite true. They do have different personas because Archbishop Welby, just like the Pope is the people's Pope, Archbishop Welby is kind of the banker's Archbishop.
The suburban stockbroker.
Yeah, the stockbroker, where he understands business and the acumen and all of finance, and he's bringing that into the world of the church and trying to hold business accountable. And it's nice to watch and see, but it's not holding the same structure of the church that we're so used to, George. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Or consistent. Consistence. Well, and there's the problem. And we run into it with Rowan Williams and other archbishops before him who say one thing and intend something else, and then everything gets mixed up in the middle. And, you know, we pray nothing but a great blessing upon Archbishop Welby's ministry and his time as Archbishop. But I want to remind you, in a couple episodes past, like 6 or 7 episodes again, George and I said you really need to dump the staff. You know, the most well-intentioned archbishop with the most lofty goals is still going to be held back by that Lambeth staff that is doing the same old modus operandi, and you can tell you're 2 or 3 months in, and there's not a lot happening. And well, it's not you; it's the staff, right, George? Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I've heard rumors that he invited an enemy of the Church of Nigeria to his installation, George. No. Yeah. Hmm. George, sometimes there's reform in the church that not everybody can agree on. One of the big spotlights of that would be women's ordination. Some people hold the biblical affirmation that the priesthood is reserved for men and that men are stuck with it. And over time, some churches like the Episcopal Church, Reformed Church of America, Methodist, United Church of Christ, the list goes on, have adopted women's ordination into their constitution. Most of them say, listen, if you don't really biblically agree with this, you're still safe. Your jobs are secure, nobody's going to look down on you, and that was called a conscience clause. The Reformed Church of America, a Dutch organization, has taken out their conscience clause, and that's going to have some radical ramifications for some of the conservatives, George.
Yeah, the General Synod of the Reformed Church of America, RCA. Not only do they make TVs, but they're a Presbyterian type church. They met this past Thursday at Center College in Pella, Iowa, and they officially removed the conscience clause from their Book of Church Order. In 1979, the RCA, which is the inheritor of the old Dutch Reformed Church,
Right, yeah.
the people who settled New Amsterdam, but primarily they're the churches of Dutch immigrants to Michigan, Wisconsin, the upper Midwest in the 19th century. Dutch Protestants settled in the U.S. In 79, they allowed women bishops, and in 80, they introduced a clause in the Book of Church Order, saying that you can object on biblical principles to women clergy, and we won't hold it against you. They've removed that protection, and now if you object to women clergy on biblical issues, tough. Hit the highway, pal.
Now, the Episcopal Church doesn't really have a clause like that. However, in the Church of England, they're kind of famous for their "we'll protect you," and this kind of developed flying bishops and all the ability at all to protect anybody of the mindset, that evil mindset of men's only ordination. And they were protected within the Church of England, but now not so much anymore, George.
Right. The Church of England promised there would be no discrimination against those who did not agree with the ordination of women. And what happened was there's been ongoing, complete, total discrimination against those who oppose to the ordination of women. And now the House of Bishops wants to remove the last protections for those clergy who, for biblical or tradition reasons, evangelicals or Anglo-Catholics, they're basically saying, look, you've got to take this, like it or lump it. You know, if you don't like it, we're going to make you leave. That's what the RCA has done. And some people in the RCA think this is wonderful because it fully recognizes the integrity of women's ministry. Well, that is an argument, but the other argument is that liberals are illiberal. Unless you agree with them, you know, get out, you know, go. And I don't see, in other words, the RCA is not an Anglican church, and they're free to do what they want to do. But within the Episcopal Church, we never really had a conscience clause. We had a mafia clause, which was continue to pay us money and we won't kill you. The Church of England doesn't have a mafia clause. They had real laws, but they were never enforced, and now they're going to. For those of a biblical mindset, this is a real problem.
Now, this is obviously going to lead to slower reforms in the future because there's no protection for those who use the Bible as their model for theology, while other people are using the Bible for the model of theology, and hermeneutics on and on again, eisegesis, exegesis. George, if you can't protect those who held a tradition and a standard, who can you protect?
Well, let's go back to the RCA for a minute. The RCA are not a bunch of raving loonies.
No,
this is a traditionally minded Presbyterian denomination. And in 2012, their General Synod passed a very strong statement opposing gay marriage, saying that if any of their ministers performed a gay marriage, they would be subject to disciplinary purposes, and that homosexual behavior is contrary to God's will and God's laws. But they also passed a statement saying we should have a, quote, grace-filled conversation about homosexuality.
Indaba.
When I hear grace-filled conversation, the hairs in the back of my neck begin to rise, because that's such code word for saying we liberals are going to outlast you conservatives, and eventually, if you hold to the biblical standard on human sexuality, just like those who held to the standard on women's clergy, we're going to get rid of you too. It's scary.
There exists the biggest problem. Liberals can talk longer than conservatives can listen. George, little quick quiz here. We're 2 years into the spring that took over the Middle East. Many countries fell, including their tyrant leaders. What's the list?
Libya, Tunisia, Yemen. The civil wars started in Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and maybe Turkey now. Yeah,
maybe Turkey. We now have a continued civil war in Syria. And you and I at the time, and most of America, was like, yeah, finally these guys are going to have a little democracy and, you know, get with the program we've had here since 1492. But the reality is we had a warning letter early on from Bishop Meniernes, who says, guys, I know it looks kind of cool, this democracy thing, but the tyrants of the Middle East are actually protecting the Christians. It doesn't look pretty, but they stop wars from happening, these little civil wars in countries. And we have a very famous tyrant here in Egypt, and I would prefer if he stayed in office. It's not going to look pretty, but he will save the Coptics from being ruined, and he'll save the Christians from being ruined. And that's really the whole message of the Middle East. The tyrants are holding things together. And now we have the civil war in Syria. 90,000 people are dead. What's America to do? What's Europe to do? If we take a position and stand in, we arm our enemies. What's up, George?
The Obama administration is saying 4 or 5 different things, so we really don't know what America's going to do, but Britain and France have said they want to send arms to the rebels. And Bishop Mike Hill, who is one of the brighter bulbs in the Church of England chandelier, has said this is a terrible idea. There are no good choices for the Syrian situation because we're 2 years too late in intervening. If we had stepped in at the very beginning and pushed out Assad before the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda took over the opposition, then maybe something positive could happen. But now if we send arms to the opposition, Today they'll be used against Assad, tomorrow against Israel, and on the next day against us. The only way forward is a negotiated settlement, and if that means partition of Syria, if that means uneasy truce, that's going to kill less people, because the real victims of this civil war are going to be Syria's 2.5 million Christians. They have no place to go.
And it's sad because we always look at this through our 200 years of democracy. These conflicts have been going on in one form or another for 15,000 years, whether it be the Palestinians and Israel, whether it be other nomadic tribes fighting it out. And the Middle East has been unsettled land for a long time. The fact that there's any borders now is, a miracle beyond miracles, but that was the strength of tyrants and the barons who had the guns first and who didn't mind making the bloodier war. Now we find ourselves trying to put our democracy eyes on this and says, why doesn't democracy work in the Middle East? They never had it before. They don't know what it looks like. And you can't expect them to adopt it and love it the way we do here in America. And it's messy here in America. It's going to be bloody over in the Middle East, George.
There are no good solutions. There's no happy way to wrap this all up and say, if somebody only does this or somebody does that. This is a terrible situation, and it's going to get worse. And I think giving food aid, refugee support, helping those who are hurt with medical and financial assistance, that's one thing. But giving more guns to the people in the middle of a battle, that's a mistake.
Another problem we've run into now is there's no more place for refugees to run to. There used to be a protected place where the Christians could run to. They could go into Turkey or they could go into Egypt and have some type of refugee camp status.
Yeah, I mean, the Iraqi Christians, most of them fled to Syria.
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. Those aren't there's no position now for the Christians to exit to. So we need to pray for our brothers and sisters in Christ, pray for the conflict in the regions, and understand that right now those Christians need courage and protection. And you need to be
Kevin,
prepared for
apart from Israel, Kevin, what's the safest place to be a Christian these days in that part of the world?
that. You guys aren't going to like this, but the safest place to be a Christian right now is Iran. If you are not evangelical, but you belong to a church and you want a fellowship and you're not in the papers, Iran allows for non-Zionist Israelis. They allow for non-evangelical Christians, and they will protect your right to do what you want as long as you're not converting Muslims. If you just hold your peace, you're fine. Now, that's a sad reality that Iran would protect you, but nobody else in the Middle East is. And that is the end of Anglican Unscripted 75. Okay, it's almost the end. We have a couple quick news items that didn't make it into the episode because they're not worthy of a whole segment. 3 new archbishops were elected to the Anglican Communion. Well, one's a repeat offender, right, George? Who are they?
Peter Kwong, Archbishop of Hong Kong, re-elected. Clyde Igara, Bishop of Dogara, was elected Archbishop of New Guinea. Mm-hmm. And the Bishop of Northern Mexico, I think his name is Martinez, but I'm not certain.
Sure.
Bishop of Northern Mexico replaced Carlos Touche Porter, who's the Bishop of Mexico City, as the new Archbishop of the province of Mexico.
Now, 4 years ago, this next topic would have been our lead story. Hong Kong endorses the Anglican Covenant.
I know the covenant's on a roll. This is number 7 of 39 provinces to endorse the covenant. You know, this is really going to start something.
It's like a snowball going down a mountain. All right. So, you probably don't, you're from Florida. That analogy doesn't hit for you. Up here in the cold Northeast, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we bought our tickets to GAFCON. Both George and I are going to fly there a day before the event. Going to get situated. Going to stay, record, edit, report, do all the fun things. However, we started to look at hotel prices, and it's not the Motel 6 prices we're used to here in America. It's basically $225 a night for the cheapest hotel we could find in any star range available. So we need to be raising some fundage for some hotel rooms and living abroad and eating the food there. So Here is the donation button to pay for our hotels. Please, we don't want a one-star hotel in Nairobi. The crime and all that, not good. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 75 of Anglican Unscripted. Just a second. Just a second. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, all right, cool. Look at the camera. There you go. You're ready. I'm ready. Anytime.
All ready, Coach. Put me in.
Put me in, man. 3, 2, 1. Learn some information from the Archbishop Duncan's speech. What did we learn, George?
We learned, first of all, what did we learn?
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Filioque clause, but we're not doing that this week, are we?
No, we're going to do he met with Canterbury.
And talked about they need to address the question of affinity diocese.
Yeah.
What did he talk about? Basically what he said is that